All right, you're good, Jared.
Very good. Thank you, Doug. I'll welcome everybody here to this meeting of the Rockland Charter Committee. It's great to be back here tackling this important work for the town. We're going to try and we got some stuff to go over and go through, but we're going to try and keep it concise and as productive as possible. So the first item on the agenda is minutes of the previous meeting. I'm not sure, Kathy, do you have minutes?
You know what? I wrote them. I haven't
Okay.
read them, but I do have them.
Okay, that's fine.
Want me to
So we
read 'em?
can't. No, why don't you do this since we haven't seen them yet? We won't vote on them tonight, but just send them out. Send these ones out. Send the ones you already wrote for the last meeting out, and then send ones out tonight for tonight, and
Okay.
we can vote on them at the next meeting. That's fine.
Okay.
So we'll dive. We'll just get right into it here. We've got Mike Ward, Jim Tarr, and Marilyn. I'm sorry, Marilyn, I forget your last name, from the Collins Center.
Okay. Oh, good. I was wondering who that was.
Yeah, we're very. I know I'm personally very excited to have been able to procure their services. I'm glad that we were able to make that happen and make that work. So obviously the general agenda item is discussion with Mike Ward et al. And we sent the framework for beginning the charter. So just for the benefit of folks who might be watching at home, or for those who will end up streaming this later, I'll just read sort of the overarching question that was posed to us, and then there's a series of 6 questions that I think would be great for us to sort of go through each one of them at a time. I'm hoping we can keep it concise, keep it to about an hour if possible. Could be less, could be more. I'm going to foresee that an hour is probably just right. But basically right now, I think we're going to start discussing generally what are the systemic problems that we are hoping to solve, and/or the long-term threats that we are hoping to avoid. So just some quick background. Doug and I had some separate conversations with Mike Ward to sort of arrive to that very important question. And I think it was an important one because it's one that we haven't really asked yet. Is what are we trying to fix, and what are we trying to make better? I mean, there are things that work now, and there are things that could be better. So before we go into all that, though, Doug, I just want to hand it off to you real quick, see if there's anything you wanted to add, or if I managed to cover it all.
Oh, no, that's good, Jared. I appreciate you setting it up. No, we're fortunate that town meeting previously appropriated funds, so we have the money in hand to be able to pay for UMass to help guide us through this process. And just as a reminder for anybody watching at home, the committee already recommended a number of really straightforward, low-hanging fruit is what you called it earlier. And so at our last annual town meeting, we voted those, and they're working their way through the process now. So I think the whole point is now to get into some of the more difficult and more complicated issues. And with that, I think we should probably just turn it over to Mike Ward, maybe to start guiding the discussion.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Before we do that, at the last meeting, Doug, you had said that the legislature had we were waiting for approval from the legislature. Has that gone through yet?
No, so it's a long process. In Rockland,
Okay.
we have it's called a special act charter. So what that means is the town meeting votes it, sends it up to the legislature, then it gets turned into a bill. And in our instance, we voted like 5 separate articles at town meeting, and they all passed, but we did it that way just in case the legislature might okay some of them, but not others.
Okay.
When we went through Senator Keenan's office, they were okay with all 5 of them. So they consolidated it into one bill. So there's one bill that's kind of slowly working its way through the legislative process. It has to go through several committees. So, but it's not unusual. It could take a year.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was not
So
aware.
we're actually making good progress so far. It's working its way through the process.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, so with that said, we will. I'll turn it over to Mike Ward from the UMass Collins Center.
Great. Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, members of the committee. We are very excited to at least virtually be back with you. I think it feels like a decade ago, even though it was still within this year. I think that we were last down there to meet with you and talk about our services. In case any of you weren't there at that meeting, just to take 30 seconds here. The Con Center, we are part of the McCormick School at UMass Boston. We were created by the Commonwealth about 12 years ago to provide technical assistance to cities, towns, school districts, state agencies, et cetera, on a huge range of public management issues, including, of course, charter work. We have the premier team of charter experts in the state, including with us tonight and on this project, Marilyn Contrias, who's, I can say pretty confidently, has worked on more charters than, more Massachusetts charters than anyone else alive. And so we're excited to dig into this and begin this longer process with you. I know you've been working and have worked and put together that first round that is up at the legislature. So basically, the primary item, as the chair alluded to already on our agenda tonight, is to understand, what you want to focus on and what you want to tackle, what you think the issues are with the charter or with town government operations generally. I should add that we are working on a memo as part of our contract with the town that will have two parts. The first part will be a series of recommendations for technical fixes, technical corrections issues, things which would get at a couple of the later bullets on that one pager that you've got, and we'll be working to get that to you some point, probably within the month, if not within the next couple of weeks. But there's a lot of ground to cover on that. The second piece is some of which will be coming out of tonight is to delve deeper into some of the policy decisions that come out of the charter. We won't be making recommendations, you should do A, B, or C, but we'll be saying you should look at X, Y, and Z and consider what you might want to do with it. Just to say, we've looked, all three of us, Marilyn, Jim, and I have reviewed the charter a couple times. It is one of the older town charters in the Commonwealth. So when you do get that memo, just be forewarned, we will have a lot of suggested language changes. The charters that have written in the last 10, 20, 30 years differ substantially on both the text, the substance of the text, and the quantity of the text on some topics, which we'll get into in the memo. With that as introduction, actually, Marilyn or Jim, do you want to say anything else for introduction before we just dive right into the question here?
Just wanted to say hello, everyone. Good to be working on this project, and we look forward to the project to come.
Great.
And I certainly agree. I think that there are some great opportunities here for you.
Awesome.
So having said that, I'll turn it back to the chair to decide on sort of an order or how you want to get at this discussion. We'll hop in with questions and responses and comments as we go, but we really want to take this time to hear from you. What are you looking to solve? What are the issues on your mind?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So I really like the list, and I'm going to generally use the 6 questions you asked us to consider, but also sort of blend them together. So I won't necessarily ask them in general order. I do know, I won't speak for Pat, Will, or Kathy. I think there's definitely one of the bigger issues might be the overall flow chart of our current town government system. I've worked in government. I've worked for major corporations. In none of those circumstances or situations has there ever been a business flow chart that looks quite like the way the town of Rockland's looks. I'm currently furloughed from WB Mason. It would kind of be like we have the CEO, but we might separately elect our delivery drivers, who while they generally are listening, they generally don't have to, right? So I think, and I'll kick it off and we'll kind of kick it around the horn. For me, I think the biggest thing to tackle for us now is creating an efficient flow chart that has a clear head, clear direction, clear steps and levels of reporting for folks that work in the town. And frankly, that's sort of a fair thing for the folks that work for the town as well, right? I mean, that ultimately sort of gives them a clear picture and a clear view of where they fit into the overall structure instead of sort of this, well, I work in the tax collector's office, or I work in the assessor's office. I don't work for the town. I work for the assessor, or whatever.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where I'll kick it off, and Will or Kathy or Pat, I don't know if you guys want to add your thoughts too.
Well, I'll take for now anyway. I don't have any questions.
Okay. Doug.
Yeah, I'll definitely have something to say on that. Thank you. So.
I kind of stole your thunder with it.
No, it's good. I mean, the first thing is for me, and I want to make this, I'm going to probably say this over and over again at a lot of public meetings in case the public is watching this later, that all my opinions are just based on my professional experience, and it's all about like the positions and the organization. It's not about individuals or any particular people that are in the roles. We're really fortunate to have excellent staff. So I don't want anybody to think I'm targeting anything, but obviously elected department heads is really difficult for a professional manager like me because I'm presumed to have responsibility in certain areas, yet I don't really have authority or accountability over some really important positions. So that's the kind of obvious point, which I think everybody would understand, is that in my opinion, and I think if you asked any professional administrator or manager, they would want professionally appointed department heads, not elected. And we can talk more about that. But going further than that, there's also a lot of complications within our current structure where, because of how old our charter is, as Mike said, we have departments where there's elected department heads. So there's a huge gray area and lack of clarity over who technically appoints their staff and who has authority over, hiring and firing and the discipline of the staff within those elected department heads. It's just unclear. So obviously I prefer that everybody gets appointed through a professional HR process that, is under the town administrator. But if that's not the direction, at a minimum, it should be clarified so that if it's really the elected department head that has that authority, then that should be clarified. Because right now it's extremely unclear. And then of course, similarly, we have department heads that are not elected, but they're not appointed by me or even the Board of Selectmen. They're appointed by other elected boards or committees. So it just makes this fragmented system even more fragmented. And again, it's hard for anybody to understand where the accountability is. And that kind of gets to one of the items in Mike's memo to us asking about, is it, responsive to the needs and preferences of the current population? I would think the population is going to want accountability for all the services that they pay for with their taxes. And right now it's very complicated to understand, where that accountability lies. So those are a couple extra points on that one argument, Jared.
Thank you. Yeah, and I agree, and I want to echo Doug, and I think I'll speak for I can probably speak for again the rest of the committee when I say what you said at the top about the current staff that's in place, what we're discussing, the things that we want to do has absolutely nothing to do with the current performance of anybody currently in any position. And I think that's important to say. I think it's important to keep saying that. And I think, Doug, thank you for doing that, because it's important because, I mean, as much as we want to try and make this about positions and titles, there are people that do hold those positions and titles. So, but it's important that, in my opinion, I know a lot of folks in town hall and everywhere, we're, like Doug said at the top, we're very fortunate to have the people that we have there. So I wanted to echo that sentiment as well. So that way that, in the future, if they watch this or somebody else does, that they're aware that that's, we're aware of the good job that they do. So, so I think maybe we can use that as a jumping off point. Mike, if you guys want to start kind of jumping in on, pushing us to have that sort of back and forth dialogue.
Sure. And I also want to echo it, because what you both just said, because this is absolutely right, not about individuals. This is about structure. And as we say in the one pager, it's not about short term. This is about thinking longer term, bigger picture. And so whatever anyone is doing now, it's does the structure work? Do the processes work? Do the policies work? Those are the questions. And you could have this, at the same time, the divergent thoughts that the individual is doing a phenomenal job in a position, but the structure doesn't make sense and you might want to change it. And we see that all the time where towns will change a structure and grandfather in, sorry to use the term, but will basically let whoever is in the position continue until such time as that person vacates the position, and then make whatever the structural changes that's being proposed, whether it's elected to appointed or something else. So absolutely the case. Since we started down this direction, we may as well just continue a bit and get right into it. Article 2 of the charter enumerates a rather lengthy list of officers that are officers, boards, and committees that are elected. Some of which are elected by nearly universally or nearly universally by towns across the Commonwealth, and others of which you are among a pretty small number that remain to have those positions elected. So I'd be curious to hear from you specifically about some of those. Again, not the individuals, but about the boards, the committees, and the positions. Do we think that the structure is serving the community well? Do we think that if an election were held, after the current incumbent, whoever he or she may be, leaves, you'll be able to replace that person with someone else of the caliber and quality that you were hoping for, with the technical skills needed to fulfill that role? I'd be curious to hear some of your thoughts on those.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it off quick. I mean, as some know, Pat and I were on this previous incarnation of this committee, and I had done a lot of research. The town didn't have the resources to procure professional services like yours, like the Collins Center. So a lot of it was me just sort of calling other towns and talking to department heads, relying on MMA resources. One of the things I know that we are definitely an outlier on is the continued elected department heads. Especially as it relates to inside town hall. To the best of my knowledge, every town that borders Rockland no longer elects a treasurer, collector, highway clerk, maybe not clerk, but definitely treasurer, collector, and highway. So that's something that just in our own neck of the woods, we're kind of outliers on. And I think, your second question there was the best one, Mike. Should the current individuals that are in those elected positions retire or resign or leave or whatever, they're done, is there any guarantee that their replacement is going to be of their equal qualification? There is no guarantee. I mean, I can tell you, I'm an English history sort of mind. I'm not a math mind. So I would be a disaster as a treasurer, but I could run for treasurer and win. So, and that's, I think that's sort of the big nut to crack. And I think what hopefully we can craft through you folks, and maybe I'll just ask this now, off the top of your head, and then maybe down the road, where do you see, when you looked at our charter, where are we, especially as it relates to Article 2, where are we an outlier? What are we currently doing that it seems like most towns in the Commonwealth have moved away from?
Sure, I'll start, and then I'm sure the Marilyn and Jim may have some stuff to add in. So, and you already highlighted, I think, the ones that are the most where you are the greatest outlier, and that would be the elected highway superintendent. For a town of your size, I would be willing to bet very, very few left. Marilyn can probably give a closer estimate than I can, but it is increasingly rare. It used to be common, but it is towns have moved away from it. And then the elected treasurer is the other one that I think for a town of your size, you are an outlier. And the thing that I think drives both of those ahead of some of the other ones is extreme technical knowledge on both of them that are required with both highway superintendent and treasurer. Municipal finance in Massachusetts gets more complicated every single year with new finance laws, new procurement laws, with new budget challenges. And so, and that position in particular, having someone who, at minimum has the skills, but ideally it isn't going to start the learning curve at zero, that is coming in and at a higher point is an important one. Clerk is a little more mixed. It's certainly the direction is moving from elected to appointed, but I think there are still more of them out there. So that one is slowly churning, but not quite as fast. I don't know, Marilyn, of the others that are enumerated there, are there others that you would place them on the outliers as an outlier?
I would place the Water Commission there because so many communities now have consolidated departments of public works that have a water division within them. And is the Water Commission simply, is it an operational, does it have operational responsibility, or is it just, sort of making policy or program decisions?
So it's operational, and I know Mike, Doug, and I discussed this in our previous conversation. But just to add a wrinkle to that, we are a joint waterworks with Abington. So our Board of Water Commissioners are elected separately. We elect 3. Abington elects 3. They form the joint waterworks, and they hire. Excuse me. They hire the water, is it the superintendent? I forget his official title.
So it's an interlocal agreement?
Yes. That dates back to, I want to say 1910. That's not an exaggeration. It's
okay. All right. I understand.
It's been a joint waterworks for a long time.
Okay.
And sewer, Marilyn, I don't know if you saw, there's also similar, also elected separate.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I did notice that. I was just concerned about the water, given the extent of state regulation in that area.
Absolutely, and just to make it easy for Marilyn and for everyone else, for all of these separately elected boards that would have the sewer commissioner or the water commissioner, health agent, assessor, those elected boards are the ones that appoint and hire those individuals.
Well, that was my sense.
Yeah, so that's, I think, Doug, maybe the Board of Selectmen hires the building inspector. They hire, I think, the Recreation Commission director now, and maybe the Council on Aging director. And those do have separate policy boards. But other than that, those boards that are elected separately, they hire those individuals.
Okay.
And can I just jump in and make a related point that I just want to put out there too, which is, and it dovetails perfectly with what Jared just said, because there's all these different entities that are appointing different positions. The situation that I walked into, the way it had evolved over the years in Rockland, each one of those positions all had separate, independent, multi-year employment contracts, which is really, not a best practice. So what I've been trying to do is move away from those and get everybody, like what a normal business would do, or most modern towns, is have everyone be a normal at-will employee that's subject to modern personnel policies, modern standards, rather than different people that may have negotiated, different agreements with different levels of pay or other benefits, and going out multi-years when, think of right now with COVID, nobody saw this coming, and our budget, hit the wall, and having to be forced into future year raises that normally we wouldn't choose to do right now because we couldn't afford them, all these types of things. But mainly just having a standard set of, benefits and procedures rather than locking us in, not to mention performance, being able to recognize performance. So that's partly a byproduct of all these different boards and committees, making their own deals with people rather than a standardized process.
Can I jump here? Yeah.
Of course.
Would I noticed a lot during the elections, nobody's running for a lot of positions. They are
Mhm.
usually whoever is in there and nobody runs against them. So would doing away with these and making them an appointed um, people, would that do away with all this?
Well, so
We never,
That eliminates a lot of the issues that the town administrator has raised.
yeah.
That was on my mind, whether any of these offices were competitive at
Oh,
all.
Not lately, not in
yeah,
the elections.
I mean, I won't. Sorry, Mike. I won't delve too deep into memory lane. You know, my dad was a selectman about 20 years ago, and I kind of tagged along with him to everything. So I sort of have the historical knowledge. To answer your question, Kathy, no. I mean, once these department heads get elected, they don't get challenged again. And it's a great question, because what sort of harpooned us, and I guess maybe this is a good segue into, you know, again, why I think having the Collins Center on board really helps us. What harpooned us the first time we attempted these changes, and what I already sort of see and sense and can tell that's already starting to develop outside, you know, in our town, is it's my right to vote, and they're taking away my right to vote for someone. To that point, to that end, though, you know, what right do you have? I mean, you're circling a bubble for someone who's unopposed. So how are we taking away your right to vote in an unopposed election?
And
Um,
it's not always qualified.
Well, that's exactly it.
People who are not qualified for that.
Right. You know, as Mike, and I'll let you jump in, Mike, but as Mike just said, I'm sorry if it was Mike or Marilyn who had pointed out a highway and treasurer because of high technical capability.
Mhm.
You got to keep in mind right now, the only qualification you need in the town of Rockland to be the highway superintendent or the treasurer is you have to be 18, a registered voter, and live in Rockland. That's,
Oh,
quite frankly, the only qualification. Yeah, but really, I mean, so quite frankly, that is the only qualification you need to and get more votes than the other guy or gal. I mean, so that's,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
Excellent people in there now.
oh, of course, we do. And
Oh,
Pat,
yeah,
allude to it. We have,
Yeah, I'm not saying anything about
Yeah.
anybody being unqualified now, but that could happen, you
it
know.
could, and frankly, in some,
That could
it has. It could and it has, unfortunately. So again, you know, I'll always use self-deprecating humor. I could get elected treasurer next year, and that would not go well for the town of Rockland. You know, I consider myself a pretty smart guy, but I can tell you, me being the town treasurer or a highway superintendent
Yeah,
would not go well for the town.
yeah.
But I'm pretty confident I can win an election. You know what I'm saying? So sorry, Mike. I know you wanted to jump in, but you know, that's kind of,
That's my point, you know.
yeah.
And I just noticed that it seems that nobody wants to run against any of these people, not, you know, for whatever reason that, you know, could be time constraints, could be they don't want to make waves with that person. But it just seems like we have a lot of positions that nobody wants to run against. So by appointing people, maybe we could eliminate some of that. That was only my.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that's throughout the Commonwealth. A lot of towns have voiced for decades
Mhm.
the failure of people to run for these offices, and that's what leads to them being changed to appointed. And they have people tell them, "I'll serve, but I won't run."
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
They don't want to be candidates. They don't want to be on the ballot. They're willing to serve, and they'll serve in an appointed capacity. I've heard this since the 80s everywhere.
Yep.
Okay.
Marilyn beat me to the punch, but it's anecdotally we've heard it over and over again. You got a border committee, no one runs for it. As soon as you make it appointed, there's a subset of people that are happy to volunteer but want nothing to do with electoral politics.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so,
Yeah, that too. Even
Yeah.
on some of the other committees, yeah.
and we will, as part of our research, we will want to collect a decade or so, maybe more, if it's easy to get, of election results. We'd like to be able to to have you all show in whatever report you produce at the end, you know, what the actual choices the voters had on a lot of these positions, because, and you may find that there are some that had periodically competitive, but if it's like many places, they will see, and we can represent it graphically pretty clearly. You'll see, you know, in 10 years, this board or committee did not have a single contested election or something like that. And I think that helps people, I think, understand it. And the other side of the coin that we sometimes talk about on this issue is not how the person is chosen, but what the pool is like that the person is chosen from. And so, you know, I looked it up, your labor force is about 10,000 people. So by virtue of the fact that an elected official has to be a resident of the community, your total possible pool is 10,000 people at any given point. Whereas if it's an appointed position with no residency requirement, the commutable radius of, you know, 500,000 or a couple 100,000 people to choose from to fill those department head positions is a lot more, a lot larger pool to choose from. So, well, so this is good. You know, this is a very good first discussion to dive into. I'm sure we will loop back to this topic before, but I do want to press on to some of the some other topics and hear what else is on your minds, either as it relates directly to what we've talked about so far, or if it's something else entirely. We'd love to, you know, just get as much on the table as possible.
Definitely. Yes, I mean, we'll just keep sort of trudging ahead. Does the charter include a current understanding of best practices? I think we already kind of covered that. I would say, again, using corporate experience and government experience, I would say no. You know, I don't know if anybody agrees or disagrees. I think Doug has enumerated on it pretty well too. You know, I'm not sure, and I'm a layman when it comes to something like this, but I can't really discern a single best practice that, you know, maybe I'll throw it to you, Mike. Is there anything in our charter that you guys would take and shop to another community or use in another community?
You know, you've got a few things. Again, a lot of the language is very antiquated, and so even where you do have some best practices in there, it tends to be described a little differently, I think, in some places. Let me see here if I can pick a couple examples of things.
Well, one example that comes to me is that you do have a capital plan.
True.
Okay.
I'm not sure that it's written in a way that is always helpful to you, but that's a good marker in terms of saying, yeah, that's a good practice to have established.
Similarly, you have a built-in charter review, which is something that all modern charters do. Yours is a little different. The Charter Maintenance Committee is a little different than the typical 10-year charter review, but it is, you know, it is a best practice to have a review of some kind built in, so that's good. You've got some citizen relief mechanisms in there. Again, same as before. I think some of the details could benefit from some discussion as we get further along, but the fact that you said you've got an operating budget process built into it, which is good. I see some details that I would be curious about, you know, the timeline in particular. I think I just froze.
Well, I can still hear you.
Sorry if I just froze.
We can still hear you. Your picture is a little grainy.
Okay.
But well, at least I can still hear you. I can't speak for everyone else.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. Got it. So the fact that you've got a description of an operating budget process is good. Again, I think when we come to it later, we'll want to talk about, are the details working? But it is good that you've got one in there. From Marilyn, Jim, others you want to call out?
The only thing that I would make a comment about is if you're concerned about folks in town who feel like they're kind of losing out on the democratic process, if you choose to go in the direction of professionalizing more positions and having them be appointed versus elected, people are always going to vote for their board of selectmen, and that's always going to be the overarching policy-making body. So if people are really discontent with the people who end up getting appointed to positions, they have a mechanism to do something about it, and it's going to be democratic.
Absolutely. Now, I will tell you, Jim, that was the argument that Pat and I made 10 years ago. But again, we didn't have the professional services to really enumerate a lot of the things that we're going to enumerate on with this undertaking now. But I agree 1,000%. I mean, ultimately, the Board of Selectmen, will have to make their decisions. And, if there's things that occur that is not up to the population snuff, then like in any other sort of electoral situation, it's the executive head that usually rolls. So good. Okay. So I'm glad, so it's good to hear that we do have some best practices. Anybody else, Pat, Kathy, Will, Doug, sort of thoughts on best practices? So it does sound like from the onset, and I will say again, just, not to be the historian in the room, but the Capital Planning Committee, the Charter Maintenance Committee, all have come about in very recent times. Those were all.
I know it was a recent. It was an amendment. Yeah.
So I guess that's really interesting. At least for the rest of the, for the rest of the committee to just keep in mind that the examples of the best practices have come about in the last 15, 20 years. So I think that gives us our work cut out for us on some of the other ones. So has the charter been kept consistent with changes in state or federal laws? My elementary, I have no idea what state laws apply to, most of the positions that are in town hall. Maybe some in some offices. At least I'm on the planning board. I know what state laws apply there. Is a charter though, and I guess this is something I think we discussed back in, and I'm not sure if this is when we had you guys with us. We did also meet with some town managers, some other town managers before. Is that something that the charter does? So I guess my thought had always been to create a document that sort of spells things out, but also creates the flexibility for the executive, so vis-a-vis that, the Board of Selectmen, to have the capability to make sure that the offices and the individuals that ultimately may end up being appointed end up being consistent with state and federal law. Did that kind of make sense? Did I ask that correctly or state that correctly?
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying. I think, well, first of all, go ahead.
Oh, no, my headphone fell out.
Oh, okay. So to your point on the flexibility, I guess, absolutely. And one of the things we'll note in our memo is that this document could be made a lot more flexible by the removal of some things that are less often in charters and more often in bylaws, or are defaulted to state law. So we'll touch on some of that when in the memo for you to consider. But there are certainly, and there, in terms of what, allowing individuals to follow state and federal law, absolutely that should be a guiding principle. But there's also text in here that is contrary to either state or federal law, that again, it's not going to override the state or federal law, but it should be, in that case, it should be removed so as not to cause confusion. And we could go through and find a bunch of examples. The one that struck me most clearly was the school committee being provided oversight over private schools in Rockland, which I mean, I'm not an attorney, but I'm not aware of any basis for that in state law. Marilyn, do you happen to know if there's something backing that would back that up?
I couldn't find anything after we talked about it. I really couldn't. But it's just something that we need to explore a bit more, I guess. It doesn't appear it doesn't appear in most standard provisions for school committees. Can I just go in a slightly different direction and respond to the first part
Sure.
of that question?
Yeah,
Which is
course.
what goes in a charter. And Mike has touched on this. And I think that it is mentioned that some of the material that is now in the charter can be in bylaws so that they can be changed as circumstances change. And the charter itself is your legal foundation, and it's meant to be both a document to provide general guidance in the sense of if you say that let's say there's a provision for the Board of Selectmen to have a strategic plan, we're not going to describe what that has to include in the charter. That's up to the Board of Selectmen. We've asked for this plan, and it's their responsibility. It's the board's responsibility. The charter doesn't have to spell that out. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And so a lot of the, like Mike's touched on already, I don't mean to overemphasize this point. The places where you have too much detail is actually kind of constraining you.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's, as I got a little winded, but I think that was kind of the overarching point that I was making at the top, which was where, I guess I've always looked at the charter as almost like our little constitution, right? I mean, the Constitution spells out a lot of things, but it doesn't spell out a lot of specific things, and that's where obviously institutions create their own rules, or you have, again, and we have bylaws, and you have a set of laws as well. So
right.
State and federal. So I've always sort of kept that in my framework of mind, and given the flexibility again to the leadership of the town,
right,
to be able to operate flexibly within the charter.
Hey, Jared, can I add one point to that?
Absolutely.
I think this sort of relates to the question about, being consistent with state and federal laws. So, and again, this is not directed at any people. This is just a concept or a generic point. I think according to our charter that anybody can run for the Board of Selectmen. So I assume that means an active town employee could run for the Board of Selectmen, I think. And so there's obviously state laws that govern, conflict of interest and all that type of thing. So, and I'm sure this has probably happened in the past. And I'm assuming, if someone was an active employee and they were elected to Board of Selectmen, they probably recused themselves from various votes of the board that could have a either real or perceived, financial benefit to them. But that just gets complicated. And so I'm just kind of throwing that out there as something that seems to be silent, but there are state laws that kind of govern that type of action. And I think it would be really helpful to clarify that. That's one issue I've thought a lot about since I started.
Okay.
Yeah, and we've seen that. I worked on a charter, a first charter for a much smaller town, about 5,000 people, and they had a 3-member Board of Selectmen. And at the time we were working on it, one of the selectmen was a laborer in the highway department, and one was a teacher in the regional school district. So in any given vote, you typically had one, if not 2 people who had to recuse unless they had to invoke rule of necessity. And so it was really cumbersome for them to continue to move things forward. So when they wrote the charter, they put in a provision about that, about not being on the board. It also is odd to be in a laborer in the highway department, reports to the highway supervisor, who then reports back to you as the select board member. Created some odd dynamics for sure. So.
Absolutely.
Okay. Other on this matter, on this topic?
Will, Pat, Kathy?
Oh, I'm all set there.
Okay.
Good point there, Doug.
All right. Next up, has the charter been kept consistent with changes in values or cultural changes? I guess I didn't really understand what this question was posing.
Sure. So the most common example going on right now on this one is, and it's not happening everywhere, but there are a bunch of towns across the state that are changing Board of Selectmen to Select Board. changing board of aldermen to city council, basically removing gender from
Yeah.
from the boards. And related to that, there are many charters that, you've got at the end, yours says he throughout it, and then at the end it says he, means she, and she means he, and all that. Many charters are just working to strip away the pronouns entirely. So that's just, those are some examples of what we mean by values or cultural change. And different places, are more or less interested in that. So
Yeah, I mean, I know in terms of selectmen to select board, that's just personally speaking for myself, I'm not interested in doing that. But that said, and I think I mentioned it at some point, I do agree cleaning up the pronouns throughout the charter would definitely, I think, would be beneficial. If we get this to the exact point we want it to be, I guess you would hate somebody to read it and see, the male specific pronoun. You're right. It's only, I don't think she is mentioned in the charter at all. At least the last time I read it, I don't think it was. So I guess you would hate to sort of have someone read that and not think, oh, well, maybe I'm not welcome. So, so the pronouns, I 1000% agree, but I'll ask, Pat, Will, or Kathy, when it comes to the Board of Selectmen, if you guys have an appetite for that. Yeah. Okay.
Doesn't make a difference to me. I know what they mean, it's.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So, I mean, maybe with that one, we can, can sort of table the idea of changing the Board of Selectmen title, but I agree with cleaning up the pronouns. Do the rest of the committee agree with that?
I do.
Okay. Yeah, and let's go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. I was just going to say that, I'm sure that, every 10 years or so, there's some other thing that will be the focus, whether it's 10 or 20 years ago, I'm sure there were things that were changed, and, so part of this is just to make sure that the document reflects what the town wants to
absolutely
reflect to the public. So
definitely. Okay. Yeah. So I think definitely we can add in our scope, cleaning up pronouns, and we can revisit some of the other ones at another time. So, number 5, is there any text? Well, I'm sorry. I should ask. Everybody's good on that one, right?
Yeah. All set.
Okay. Perfect. Is there any text in the charter that has caused confusion or dispute over interpretation? I love seeing Doug on mute so quick. I can't speak to that. I don't work in town hall. I don't run town hall. Again, I can only go based off of the historical observation, being the son of the selectman, and Doug could probably confirm this. I'm pretty certain that 90%, maybe I'm exaggerating, of how our town government operates is operating on a principle called past practice, as in this is just how we do it and this is how we've always done it. And I'll turn it over to Doug on that one, because that's a very, I think, sort of technical thing that I don't think myself or the others might be completely equipped to tackle.
Yeah, I can give maybe like 3 off the top of my head. One of them I already mentioned, which
I can't hear Doug. Am I the only one who can hear?
can you guys?
I can hear him.
Okay.
I got him. I hear him.
So,
okay. Yeah, I do too.
One of them I already mentioned, which is staff that work in departments where there are elected department heads. There have been issues already where who actually has say over that employee? Is it me or is it the elected department head? So we've already talked about that one. Another one gets to the authority to reorganize various departments. That's a really important thing as times change, and especially fiscal emergencies or just best practices. Sometimes it makes sense to combine departments, combine positions, just reorganize. It's very ambiguous whether I have authority to do that in certain areas. And then another one that is really critically important relates to procurement and contract authority. There's some specific language in the charter relating to the town administrator. Maybe it's administering contracts. I forgot exactly how it's worded, but it's more common in other towns where, for example, the town administrator can execute all contracts up to a certain dollar threshold, $1 million, whatever it is, and anything above that amount would need ratification by the Board of Selectmen, something like that. But again, where we have all these different very decentralized structure, I found there have been instances where there's been a little lack of clarity as it relates to procurement authority as well. So those are three big ones for me that are cause confusion. Yeah. Sure,
Go ahead. Was that Marilyn or who? Thought I heard somebody.
That was me. That was me telling Beth that he froze.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Hopefully you heard the end of it. So it was the staff and elected department heads, procurement, and reorganizing departments.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, we don't work within the confines of the charter. So I think ambiguity is a good theme for those three, but I would definitely, on that one especially, just defer to Doug and what Doug said. I don't know, Pat, Kathy, or Will, if you have any other thoughts you want to add to that. But I think those ambiguities, one way or the other, Frank, obviously I think we're all kind of on the same page on what direction I think we want to try and take this thing. But regardless of that, it would be very valuable for us to clean those ambiguities up.
And related to that was also something I mentioned before, which was, again, we've had a past practice, as Jared said, of having lots of individual employment contracts. And I think some of that practice, which is certainly not a best practice these days, has kind of arisen out of the confusion and lack of clarity in the charter over exactly, what the authority is to and what these employees are subject to.
Well, when I read the charter, that was one of the things that stood out for me, was that the language for the town administrator sort of doesn't match up with the other charter provisions, and I think I was looking to determine if there was conflict, but it sounds like it's just frustration.
Right. And I'm not looking at the charter right in front of me, but I remember there's this one sentence in there where it paraphrases everything the town administrator does by saying, in the absence of the Board of Selectmen, which is a really odd thing to me, because that almost makes it seem like it's a full-time board that's operating the day-to-day, which they're not. And so that, I don't know if that's just a relic of the past, but that's another confusing sentence for me.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, and that could get interpretive, right? I mean, for all intents, like you just said, for all intents and purposes, they are absent, right? I mean, they meet twice a month. And I know they all individually work very hard. That's obviously not what I'm saying. But in terms of the day-to-day operation, for all intents and purposes, they're absent, right? But you could interpret it the other way. And frankly, we had a selectman very recently in this town that sort of led to a lot of things happening that was inserting themselves into some of the day-to-day operation of the community very recently. So, I won't elaborate further on that. You can Google how that ended. So, so to that end, I think that does, to Doug's point, I think that definitely needs to be, clarified as well.
We need to begin to look at the language in the various sections and create some internal harmony in the document.
Absolutely. I like that term, internal harmony. All right, so like I said, I'll defer to Doug, but Will, Kathy, Pat, any other thoughts on this subject?
No,
All
that's
right, Mike.
I think you got everything covered there.
with everything. Yeah.
Okay. If Mike, Jim, and Marilyn are also, we'll go on to the final one. And again, this is something that I will defer to Doug and the experts on. Have special acts enacted over the years been reviewed for current validity? Again, I just speaking for myself, but I'm not of the capacity to necessarily read our charter and deem whether it's valid or in tune or in line with, or in harmony. That'll be the theme with
Okay.
state law or federal law or anything else. So I'll defer to you folks on that.
And I don't know the answer to it either. I would
Yes.
imagine there's been a lot of changes in law, especially as it relates to labor law that could very well be inconsistent, but I've not done any kind of review or asked any attorneys to do any review since I've started.
Carolyn, do you want to hop in with any? I've got a couple little things, but
No, go right ahead.
so the one that jumped out at me was under the for recall. There's a lot of language that well, I guess this is not so much about validity as there's a lot of language in there that needs some review, both in terms of the thresholds, but also it's written. It was clearly dropped in. You can read it. It very clearly it was inserted separately from the rest of the text, and it doesn't quite link to the rest of the text. It keeps referring back to an act, which is weird, seeing as it's part of the charter. So there's a bunch of stuff with it. I don't know, Marilyn, did you have other thoughts on? I know when you and I chat about it, that I think that one was one that came out.
Yeah, I think that overall, this, we'll just go with the harmony theme here, and note that there are just ways that your charter is, like I said, it constrains you, and there are internal contradictions in it. And what we want to do is make sure that we find them and that we can adjust them so that everything works together in a more reasonable way.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's kind of interesting you mentioned that, Mike, the recall portion. The town, it's about 2.5 years ago now, had begun embarking on a potential recall, and I specifically remember fielding quite a few phone calls from folks asking me to interpret that section, because there are certain parts of it that were very unclear, and I think I have a pretty good technical mind for reading these things, and I kind of looked and said, I'm not of the capacity to read that. Like you're it was a political campaign, so you're going to have to consult an attorney. Like I can only kind of give you my best idea on it. So I find it interesting that was kind of what jumped out at you, because there was some ambiguity again, even with it 2.5 years ago. So that's great. So I think we've got a good scope, and look at that, we kept it to about an hour, which I'm pretty proud of. Does anybody have anything else? I do have one more thing I do want to add on this before, but does anybody else have anything they want to add on those? Doug, go ahead.
It doesn't specifically relate to that, but it was something I was going to just throw out there just for discussion to see what you guys thought, and also the Collins Center, which is the quorum for town meeting. So I know, it's currently 150 is what's in the charter, and I believe it was reduced from maybe 300 earlier. Some years
It was.
And the reason I bring it up is because, due to COVID and the public health implications of COVID, at our last town meeting in June, the Board of Selectmen and the moderator took advantage of the law that was passed recently to allow towns to reduce the quorum down to as low as 10% of the normal quorum, just because of the pandemic. So we did that at our last town meeting in June. And the board and the moderator just recently voted that again for our upcoming special town meeting in November. So, and I know there's a lot of, interestingly, there's been some questions and concerns about it from the public, more so now than the time we did it just this past June. And I'm just sort of throwing that out there because, again, for me, from my perspective, it's a minimum quorum is a very arbitrary thing. And from my perspective, there's as many people, every single, registered voter can go to town meeting. It's not a cap, it's not a maximum. We lower it to 15 people. 5,000 people could show up and we'd accommodate every single person. So I was just curious what other people's
Made
thoughts.
it, Doug, you made it very clear. Doug, I said, you made it very clear at the selectmen's meeting that it was lowered to 15, but 500 could come, you know? You did make that very clear, so I don't know why all the controversy.
All 11,000 registered voters could come, like you just said, Doug.
I just think that that's something.
Have you ever looked at zero quorum?
So, no, to be completely honest, I know it's something that's been in the back of my mind. It's all been anecdotally. Hanover, and as you guys go through this process, with me at least, you're going to hear me reference Hanover a lot because I think for us they're neighbors, and I knew a lot of selectmen from there, so I was able to do a lot of my own personal research back when I first chaired this committee. Anecdotally speaking, when Hanover lowered their quorum to, I think it's 10, their attendance at town meeting actually went up above and beyond what the old quorum was. And then it was heartening when Doug brought this up. I think it was in Sandwich, Doug, that Sandwich did the same thing. And the town meeting attendance in Sandwich went up above and beyond what the original quorum number was. So, you know, it's not like Hanover lowered it to 10 and 20 people showed up. Hanover lowered it from, I think, 200 people to 10 and 400 people showed up, something like that. I'm obviously using round numbers, but more people above and beyond what the old quorum used to be. So it's definitely something that I personally, I don't know, well, you know, I don't want to speak for Pat, Kathy, or Will, but as far as I'm concerned too, and you know, throw it out there, that and frankly, every piece of the charter is on the table for me. I don't think there's any part of the charter, you know, obviously we can set aside some of the things you mentioned earlier as being best practices, but as far as I'm personally concerned, I don't know about the other board members, every part of the charter for me is on the table. But to answer your question, Marilyn, it's something that's always been in the back of my mind. It's not something I'm necessarily opposed to. As a matter of fact, I'm not opposed to it at all. So that's something else I think we can put on the table. So if there's nothing else, I guess the only other thing to sort of tie it up here. Go ahead, Mike. Oh, sorry. So I guess the only other thing to kind of tie it up. I don't know if you're freezing or not. Am I the only one who can't hear him? Or
We can still hear you, but sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's gobbled.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll try and be more enunciate. I'll try and enunciate more. So, for me, I think the one last thing for us to consider is to get us to the next point here, the next step. But I would like, for me personally, I think it would be advantageous for us to create a package, right? Sort of, I personally don't think it would be effective to present it as a complete package. But I think through working with Collins and taking care of the bigger pieces that we really want to take care of first, but at least we'll have the full package available for us to be able to then execute some things down the line. And that's sort of my kind of final thought. For now, at least on that, I don't know what the rest of the committee's thoughts are, or Doug's thoughts, but I know those are kind of what I'm thinking for us. Oh, good. Now, does that sound like something that sort of makes sense in terms of in terms of sort of the roadmap? Is that something that kind of makes sense?
Yeah, so the way I was thinking about it is we want to get you this memo, and it's gonna take us a little bit, a couple weeks to wrap it up. And it'll have the two pieces to it. One, our technical review, where we'll flag the things, the state law things, consistency things like that. And then based on this discussion tonight, we can start to get into some of the substantive issues that you've raised, and give you examples, and give you choices, and give you thoughts. So, if you wanted to do X, here are a couple of ways that you could do it. If you wanted to do Y instead, here are a couple of things. So we'll start to get that in front of you or as part of the memo for some of the key issues we've covered this evening. I would have a couple things for you all to continue sort of thinking about or working on while we work on the memo, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So first of all, is to continue to mull over these questions that are on that sheet, and any additional thoughts, ideas, either bring them to the next meeting, or you can send them through the chair to us. We certainly want to continue to collect information on that. A second one is, have you all looked at some recent charters of towns that approximately your size and demographics? At any point earlier on and before you joined with us, did you have a sort of collection that was passed around, or of charters?
In this new incarnation, no.
It was Hanover.
Like I said, I had, yeah, so I Hanover, which population-wise is similar, demographically not, but definitely a similar size population, was sort of my main reference point the first time I did this. And they sort of kind of stayed that way to some degree for me. Again, I used to always make the argument, I'll use the example. I would occasionally say that a mayor council form of government is sort of my favorite type of government. That's just what I think would be best. And people would say we're too small, and I'd point out, no, North Adams has less population than Rockland, but they have a mayor and a city council. So, but that said, I also sort of am aware it's kind of hard to convince someone that what's good for a small city in the northwest corner of the Berkshires works in Rockland, Massachusetts. So that's why, for me personally, it may be just something to consider. I think for us to be able to point to Hanover, Hanover does it this way, Abington does it that way, Weymouth does it, the towns that are in our area that are, and we are lucky, again, Abington, Hanover, and a few others are similar size, demographically different, but Hanover for me was always, I guess for me just personally, I don't know about the others, but that was always my favorite charter per se. I guess if I had a favorite charter, theirs would, just sort of the way they were able to get everything in the position that they got it into. So that for me is the one that I always reference.
Would you be interested if we were to grab, 2 or 3, 4 charters from other towns that we think are, pretty up to speed, that are recently done, that we think are good examples?
Yes,
and we'll try and get
absolutely.
some that provide some different, not just 3 that are virtually the same, but we'll try and find a couple that look different from each other. And so we'll get those over to you right in the next day or two, and then you can, while we're working on the memo, you can sort of start to read through them and think through, oh yeah, I really like this from this one, and there's a little bit over here that this sounds like really what we were trying to get at. And so if that's all right, I think that would be helpful for everybody.
Great idea.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
So if that is all, the only other item I have on the agenda is other items not reasonably anticipated by the chairman. I guess I will throw in there, our schedule is certainly a little off, with Pierce telling me today that he's planning on resigning. That brings us down to a 5-member board. I think it would be advantageous for us to try and find some folks who would be willing to join. I did ask Rich. I know, Will, you weren't on the last call. I did put it out there to Rich Penny, who's obviously a selectman that we all know, to join if he can. So if we have some other folks that you know of that might be willing to join, that would be great. The charter committee is an interesting one because I think this happened the first time too, is people kept falling off because it sort of seems like it might be too daunting. But I think thankfully having the Collins Center and frankly having Doug and Rich engaged will make this a far more pleasant and enjoyable experience than it was the first time around. Having the support of the Board of Selectmen, the town administrator, and the professional services will make this a great experience, at least in my opinion. So just keep that in mind if you're out and about chatting with folks. And then I guess the only other thing I would bring up, I think if Mondays sort of work best for the four of us for now going forward, we'll keep these on Mondays. I think once the Collins Center, once Mike and Marilyn and Jim get the memo to us, I think it'd probably be a good idea to try and meet maybe a week or so after that, give us some time to consume that. Also give us some time to consume the other charters that they're going to give us to look at. Thankfully, I will admit, this is where Rockland's charter is kind of fun. Some of the other charters, and again, it's been a long time, but some of the other charters that I have read are not nearly as verbose or heavy as Rockland's. They're a little more straightforward and direct, so it won't actually be the most painful homework you'll ever be assigned. So I'll put that out there. So with that, does anybody else have anything they would like to bring up?
Oh, I'm all set.
Awesome. Okay, hearing and seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn, and I have to do a roll call since we are on Zoom, so I will have to call your name and you'll have to say no. Oh, nobody's ever said no to adjourning though. So, okay, who made the motion?
Right,
Yeah,
I thought you did.
Yeah.
yeah. Second.
No, I don't. I'm a traditional chair. I don't make motions.
I made the motion.
So motion by Pat, second by Kathy. Will, yes or no? Will,
Yes.
Will says yes. Okay, Kathy,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
and I am a yes. Doug, thank you for managing the Zoom because we would still be waiting here today if I was trying to figure it out. So, in the Collins Center, again, like I said, I'm very excited to be working with you guys. So, looking forward to
Likewise.
this.
Thank you.
Likewise.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
guys.
We'll be in
you.
touch.
Good
Thanks,
night.
everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
God bless.
Take care.